What's up, students? This is a review over evaluating evidence and looking at statistics and how they could potentially impact an argument, but also impact the credibility of a source. When we look at arguments, a lot of arguments are based on research and studies that are conducted. The problem is sometimes these studies and the way that they are conducted are questionable. They're not 100% crisp or clear in how they present their information or even how they got their information. And there's a lot of problems with it. When we look at what good research entails, and we look at what good science entails, I mean, we see a lot of examples of this in the media where they're talking about different types of drugs and they mention something about being anecdotal evidence, which when we talk about research, we talk about studies. Studies are done where you have a control group, you have a testing group, and nobody knows which is which, and you use those results to get your answers. Anecdotal evidence is that, hey, this person tried this and they got better. And then trying to formulate the reason they got that better is because they tried that one thing. Doesn't necessarily mean that's what happened. It could have happened, but there's not really research there. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about presenting information and whether that information is actually good research. So the first thing we look at is this idea of sample size. Are we talking to enough people in order to get a full range of opinions? So the idea is that we don't want to only talk to, if we're talking about Palmetto High School, and Palmetto High School is a relatively large school, 2,300 students in it. If you talk to 50 students, that's probably not a good sample size. Now, in a school that size and the number of people that you have, if you're around 250, 300 people, that's probably a pretty good sample size. You're probably going to get a good representation, which I'll talk about here in a second, of the student population. So we don't want a small number of people. We want a large number of people in order to get a full range of opinions, to get a full range of ideas. So when we talk about countries doing polls and everything, having 2,500, 3,000 people being surveyed and stuff, that's probably not perfect, but it's still probably good enough. What you don't want is a really low number of people being interviewed and them using that as a basis to generalize out to everybody. Representativeness of the sample is this idea that people are going to come from a variety of backgrounds, and you want your sample to represent that. So I like to use the example of Palmetto High School and using the representativeness of students that are in the ACE program and students that are potentially not in the ACE program. If we did a survey of students at Palmetto High School and asked them, hey, how do you feel about Palmetto High School? And ask them various questions about Palmetto High. Well, your representativeness of the sample, you could go and ask 200 students, which might be good. That's a good sample size for the number of students we have at the school. The problem is if you ask all 200 students and they happen to be students in your ACE class, that's not a good representativeness of the school population. It's not enough people, or it's not diverse enough. I mean, ACE program probably accounts for maybe 25, 30% of the population. So you're already excluding 70% of the population and how they potentially feel about something. Other factors get involved in this. When you talk about the representativeness of the sample, you have to look at age, gender, social class, ethnicity, education. There's an infinite number of factors that you could actually include in your representative sample. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to include all those factors. You have to kind of pick and choose which factors best fit what you're trying to survey. So, for example, if you are doing a school population and asking them how they feel about Palmetto, you're not going to ask people that are 35, 40 years old. You're going to ask students of Palmetto. Now, within the context of that, you might have some diversity among ethnic backgrounds, ACE, non-ACE program, athletes, non-athletes, those who are involved in after-school activities, and those that are not. Those are all contributing factors that you could potentially have within that different subgroups for that representation. So that's what we talk about. We're talking about sample size, having a large enough people, and then representing the population as appropriate as possible. So if we break things down and say 25% of the students are ACE programs, 75% of the students are not, and we wanted to survey students at Palmetto High School, and we wanted to talk to 100 of them, you should probably have 25 ACE students and 75 that are not ACE students to have a proper representation. And then within that, you can break it down even further based on potentially things like ethnic background, gender, those things. The one thing you don't want to do is include what we call few token members of a specific group. And what that means is that, we need to make sure that we get the opinion of a baseball player. So you include just one baseball player in your study, and that might not be a good representation of the number of baseball players in that population. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about a few token members, is that you don't want to just throw people in there to say they're included in your survey. You want those proportions to be correct, or your results may be skewed. Now, when we talk about how information is gathered, and again, this kind of goes into representative sample. How do we gather information? Well, the one other way of looking at it is that we sometimes do not have the ability, or we might not have the time or the resources to have a true representative sample. So what researchers do is they use what is called an opportunity sample. And that is a random sample of people that they can access easily. So that's what they mean by the opportunity. The opportunity is easier. They can talk to these people, they can survey these people, and they can get their research that way. Now, this is done a number of ways. When you think about things like how we did things, how we had students come in, this is for some of my classes from our psychology program, and they surveyed kids that were in my specific classroom. That's an opportunity because I allowed them to come in there. They had the opportunity to come in. They talked to a specific group of people. Now, is that a proper representation of the entire student population? No, but it's an opportunity. It'll at least give them some information that they can use as they kind of learn more and more about research. So that's what I mean by opportunity. It's who you have access to. This could be simply as even asking people like, hey, why don't you go out and survey these people as they come in and out of this business? That's an opportunity. Another way of getting information and getting people to participate is through volunteers. Now, when we ask for volunteers, you don't typically get a good representation because those who are willing to give their opinion typically have a strong opinion about something. When we used to do surveys every year when I used to run summer camps, and we put out surveys. Hey, voluntarily, can you give us some feedback on how we're doing at camp? And out of 200 people, we got back maybe 25, 30 of these surveys, because those who are pretty much are kind of comfortable or generally satisfied with it don't have a strong enough opinion where they feel like filling out a form. Those that do have a very strong opinion one way or the other, whether it's negative or positive. So that's why sometimes the volunteer thing doesn't always work out, because the people who want to volunteer are going to do so from a kind of strong opinionated background. Now, circumstances with evidence is collected. I've already kind of talked a little bit about this in the previous slide, but the idea is that how do they collect their data? When we talk about professional researchers, they do so in a very controlled condition. When we're doing, I talked about, very early, this idea of anecdotal research versus real research. Controlled conditions and being able to kind of set up research and really test things are going to give you much better results than taking a few anecdotes. Same thing with collecting other data. When we collect data, sometimes, and this happens a lot of time, particularly during political season, where we get tons of phone calls about, hey, how do you feel about this politician? How do you feel about this particular policy? This is called cold calling. Most of the time, I'm like, I'm not busy, or I just don't answer. But once again, we go back to that idea of asking for volunteers. Those that are going to talk are going to have a very strong opinion one way or the other. And the information they give is going to be based off that idea of having a very strong opinion. So once again, your information isn't going to be as good. The ones who don't care are going to give kind of one-word answers just to get through it, or not going to answer at all. And those who are going to be really into it are the ones that have very strong opinions. So to be valid, data has to reflect a true picture of the situation being studied. This means that the respondent must fully understand the question and take them seriously. So the idea is that we've talked about all the ways that it can't be good. What we are looking for is people that are willing to answer questions and take it very seriously. And there's reasons why people might not answer the information seriously. Some of them will just tick boxes, particularly like, they get that survey. It's, do you agree, strongly agree, somewhat disagree? And they're just trying to get through it. I think about every time I'm at the restaurant and the survey pops up. How do you feel about how your service went today? I think Chili's does this on that little computer pad. I just quickly click satisfied on all of them. I don't even read what the question is. I don't care enough to. I didn't have a bad experience. So once again, even in that situation, we're talking about, people answering questions and just ticking boxes without reading questions carefully. I'm guilty of it. So when you think about, well, how good is that survey that they're getting? Sometimes subjects may be too personal and the respondent is unwilling to actually tell the truth. When you think about questions that deal with uncomfortable subjects, sometimes people might give a joke answer, or they don't want to kind of give the truth. So once again, you're not going to have good research or good response as well. Generalizability. So this is this idea where we take a study done somewhere else and tend to try to generalize it to something else. So let's look at this idea for an example of, and adults do this a lot, this whole idea, when I was in school, we did this. This is how things should be done now. Well, things that were done 25, 30 years ago might not necessarily be relevant today. Studies that were done that long ago might not be relevant today. So as a result, we can't, if the study is too far away or too far removed, like not in the same location, not really on the same topic, or not within a certain time frame, then that information might not be as good, for example, as something else. We want research to be done around that same time frame. We want research to be based in the same area. So, for example, when they talk about, well, in a study in Finland and their education system done 50 years ago, and they want to try to apply it to the U.S. Well, they're two very different things. The education systems might not be very different, might be very different, and the time frame is going to be different. So many things have changed in the last 50 years, even last 10 years, as far as education goes. So that's what we're talking about, like generalizing. You take a study done a long time ago, any particular place, and kind of generalize it to other places, other things. This can also go from doing a research in a particular area, let's say, for example, New York City, and try to generalize it out to all Americans. That's what we're talking about by generalizing things. We're not really out here doing a proper survey of all Americans. We're generalizing what one particular area is for everybody else. Ambiguity deals with having a result and then trying to find a reason to explain that result. You didn't really get this information through a study, you just got a result, and you try to find reasons to back that up. So research results are sometimes interpreted in a way that fits the expectation or worldview of the researcher. When girls achieve fewer A levels than boys, researchers attempted to explain it by looking at gender differences at play. playing with dolls, liking to baby care, and it was thought that girls underperformed because of lack of ambition, whereas boys were more active. Play with cars and guns was related to their assertive, ambitious nature. So they did a study, they took all the males and females and they said, hey, more males are passing the test than females. Why is that? And they tried to assign it to gender roles. They're trying to find a reason for that. They're not doing it through study and everything. They're just trying to explain it based on some ambiguity of the fact that their gender roles are there. Now, let's kind of flip that. Girls have outperformed boys in school exam. They start to argue with that the idea that they're playing with dolls has been given as evidence of the frequent practicing of communication skills, which is useful in academic subjects, where boys running around with guns and swords is used to support the observation that they're less used to sitting indoors, so finding it harder to adapt to the classroom. So once again, we have the same kind of study doing. Girls achieve higher, and they're still trying to assign those same gender roles, but just kind of flipping it. And one, it's girls playing with dolls and doing that kind of stuff is negative, and the other one, it's a positive. So this is why you can't try to explain something to match the research when the research didn't include that information to begin with. It has to be kind of fit in there. So you can't have an end result and then use things to explain that end result. That's what ambiguity means. You have hey, it's that whole idea of, the concept of bad luck. Oh my gosh, I had a, awful day today. I got in a car accident. And then that accident, I got a ticket. Then when I came home, my stove didn't work, or the water, something was wrong at home, something was broke at home. And why did all that happen? Well, I woke up too early. Well, that doesn't really fit that. You can't use things that you can't have the end result and then use things to kind of fit that idea. That's what ambiguity is. You can't make up things and try to use that to explain the result. The result has to be based on some kind of reason. The explanation has to be based on research as well as the result. We have to have a connection between the evidence and the conclusion has to fit. Ambiguity can refer to the use of words, more than one possible meaning in an interview questions. Talk a little bit about this with in some of the fallacies and stuff. But the idea is that providing information leading to misunderstandings or lack of clarity is where ambiguity comes in. Data, the explanation has to support the data and has to do so through research. Just providing information doesn't fit. It has to be based on something. Lastly, we're going to look at statistics, and we're talking about how statistics can be misused, mean, median, and mode kind of being used to those statistics. So using the example of I'll call it like a gym. So at a gym, the average age of members was 18 years old. If you might find several of the members were in their 30s and the rest were in their early teens or younger, when nobody was actually 18 years old. So when we think about this idea of using the term averages and stuff. Averages takes all the numbers and gives you a number. It doesn't really. Averages can be useful, but it also can be very misleading. That's what we're talking about, misleading of statistics and prediction. They can be misleading. This idea of providing an average or the mean can be misleading. So you have a club where you go in and you're like, hey, I want to join the club here. What's the average age of your membership? And the guy, types in things like, oh, it looks like our average age is 18 years old. And you get really excited. You sign up for the club, and then you realize that nobody is 18 years old. That the extremes on either end are combining and creating that average to be that age when it might not actually have people that age. So that's where the kind of the misuse statistics can be, or use of statistics can be misleading. So when we look at trying to fix this issue. We have to be able to look at the data from a bunch of different types of data points. That's where things like median and mode come into it. So when I'm trying to figure out like whether or not I should join something, in this case, whether I should join this gym, I might ask like, okay, well, what's the central value? What's the kind of center point between the two ages? Well, in this case, we have ages 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 30, 30, 36. The median age would be 13 and a half. And again, this is between the 13 and 14 years old, since we have an even number, that mean or that center point is going to be between them. And once again, this can be misleading as well, particularly if you have a large number skewed to one side. For example, we have more teens than we do older adults in this case. So that mean or that median is going to be lower, the 13.4, which again doesn't give a good representation because you have several people that are older. The last one we're looking at is mode. That's the most common number that pops up. And in this case, that's 30 years old, which again is misleading since most of the population is in their young teens. So here we have data. It's all using the same data points, but based on using these three things, mean, median, and mode, you get three different answers, which paints a very different picture of the facility and what they potentially offer. What you end up needing is more data. So you would like to know the range. You might want to know the individual numbers and stuff like that in order to be able to make a better decision. So why is this important to know? Well, researchers are often going to choose a form of statistical presentation of their data that best supports the argument. So always look at the data and make sure that the way the statistics are being presented actually represents the information the best. Be careful with it. Make sure it represents the information the best. This idea of using averages and everything. For example, if me and 7 of my friends were all hanging out and I had 8 apples, and somebody said, "Oh, what's the average number of apples per person?" Well, the average number of apples per person is 1 per person, but I'm the only one that has apples. The other 7 people don't have apples. So that's where, think about average can be very, very misleading in that context. All right, guys, as I said, just a kind of a quick review. This is stuff that we've done recently. We've kind of gone over, before spring break and everything. If you have any questions on this, please send me a message through Remind, send me a message through Schoology. As always, be safe, wear seatbelts.